They say that history does not repeat itself, but it certainly rhymes. And sometimes, that rhyme is written in blood, etched into concrete, and screamed into the void of a winter sky. Welcome to the end of the 20th century. We are not in the trenches of the First World War, nor are we on the beaches of Normandy. We are in a place that the United Nations would later describe as the most destroyed city on the face of the earth. A place where the line between a bustling metropolis and a graveyard didn't just blur, it vanished entirely. This is Grozny, the capital of Chechnya. The date is late 1999. And we are about to witness a single day where the machinery of war reached such a fever pitch of efficiency that it ceased to be a battle, and became an erasure. A day where 2,000 to 3,000 souls, soldiers and civilians alike, were extinguished in a storm of steel and fire. To understand the carnage of this day, you must first understand the ghost that haunted the men pulling the triggers. The ghost of 1994. 5 years prior, the Russian army had marched into the same city with arrogance. They drove tanks into narrow streets, thinking they would be greeted as liberators, or at least, feared as conquerors. Instead, they were slaughtered. The Chechen fighters, mobile and ruthless, turned the city into a trap. They burned Russian armor in the streets and sent the remnants of a superpower limping home in humiliation. That defeat was a festering wound in the psyche of the Kremlin. And in 1999, under a new, cold-eyed leadership, the Russian military returned. But this time, the doctrine had changed. There would be no reckless charges. There would be no mercy. The order was simple: do not enter the city until there is no city left to enter. The strategy was medieval in its cruelty but modern in its execution. It was a siege. A constrictor snake coiling around its prey. By December, Grozny was surrounded on 3 sides. The Russian military machine had learned its lesson. Instead of sending boys to die in the mud, they sent high explosives. The build-up to the day of the Great Bombardment was a symphony of dread. The weather itself seemed to conspire against the city. It was a bitter, gray winter. The snow falling on Grozny was not white, it was stained with soot and ash, coating the ruins in a dirty shroud. Inside the city, the Chechen fighters dug in. They were outgunned, outnumbered, and entirely cut off from the world. They turned basements into bunkers and apartment blocks into fortresses. They knew they could not win a contest of firepower. Their only hope was to drag the enemy into the rubble, to make them bleed for every inch. But the Russian command had no intention of bleeding. They intended to burn. The bombardment began not with a bang, but with a roar that did not end. It is difficult for us, sitting in the safety of peace, to imagine a noise that does not stop. Usually, explosions are punctuated by silence. But on this day, the rhythm was unbroken. It was a wall of sound. From the ridgelines overlooking the city, the god of war spoke. The BM-21 Grad rocket launchers, terrifying instruments of indiscriminate destruction, unleashed their payloads. These were not precision strikes. These were area denial weapons. 40 rockets fired in 20 seconds, screaming off the rails, painting the gray sky with trails of smoke. When they landed, they didn't just hit a target, they deleted a grid square. Entire apartment blocks, the Soviet-style concrete hives that once housed thousands of families, folded in on themselves. The air pressure alone was enough to rupture lungs. The shrapnel turned glass and stone into deadly projectiles. But conventional artillery was not the darkest horror of that day. That title belongs to a weapon that embodies the absolute inhumanity of modern warfare, the TOS-1 Buratino. They call it a heavy flamethrower system, but that name is a deception. It does not shoot a stream of fire. It launches thermobaric rockets. When a thermobaric warhead hits a building, it does not explode immediately. First, it disperses a cloud of fuel, a toxic aerosol mist that seeps into every crack, every window, every ventilation shaft. It floats into the basements where families are huddling. It finds you in the dark. And then, a split second later, a secondary charge ignites the cloud. The result is not just an explosion. It is a vacuum. The fireball consumes all the oxygen in the blast radius instantly. It creates a shockwave of overpressure followed by a massive drop in pressure. Those who are not incinerated by the heat are killed because the air is violently sucked out of their lungs. Their internal organs rupture. There is no cover from a weapon that turns the very air you breathe into a weapon against you. On this day, the Buratinos were firing into the city center. They were clearing the way for the infantry, but in doing so, they were turning the basements of Grozny into mass graves. Amidst this mechanical slaughter, there were the civilians. The forgotten variables in the calculus of war. Thousands of people, the elderly, the poor, the mothers with children, were still trapped inside the iron ring. They lived in the dark, shivering in flooded cellars, drinking water from broken pipes, praying that the concrete above their heads would hold for one more hour. The Russian military had announced safe corridors for evacuation. But in the chaos of the bombardment, the concept of safety was a lie. It was on this day that a convoy of refugees, desperate souls carrying their lives in plastic bags, tried to make a run for it. They moved under white flags, climbing over the mountains of debris that used to be their neighborhoods. They believed that there was still a rule of law, that even in war, there were lines that would not be crossed. They were wrong. Whether by mistake, by malice, or simply by the blind indifference of long-range artillery, the corridor became a kill box. Shells began to rain down on the road. Imagine the panic. The deafening cracks of airburst rounds. The screams that were instantly swallowed by the roar of explosions. There was nowhere to run. To the left, minefields. To the right, burning ruins. And from above, the rain of steel. In a matter of minutes, hundreds of lives were extinguished on that road. The snow turned red. The cries of the wounded were drowned out by the relentless, methodical thumping of the howitzers miles away. It was a massacre that blurred the distinction between combatant and non-combatant until everyone was simply a target. As the sun began to set on this day of days, the intensity of the shelling somehow increased. It was the crescendo. The sky over Grozny glowed with an eerie, flickering orange light. Not from the sun, but from the fires that were consuming the city block by block. From a distance, the Russian tank crews watched the destruction. Some felt a grim satisfaction, revenge for their fallen comrades of the previous war. Others felt a hollow dread, witnessing the sheer scale of what they were unleashing. Down in the city, the silence eventually returned, but it was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of the void. The screaming had stopped because there was no one left to scream. The buildings had stopped falling because they had already fallen. When the smoke finally drifted away days later, what was left was not a city. It was a landscape from another planet. A moonscape of twisted rebar and pulverized concrete. The Battle of Grozny would continue for weeks. The infantry would eventually move in to fight a brutal, room-to-room war in the ruins. But the city was effectively dead. It had been murdered on this day. Historians and military analysts will look at the maps. They will draw arrows and circles. They will talk about encirclement tactics and suppressive fire. They will analyze the efficiency of the TOS-1 system. But we must look past the maps. We must look at the human cost of a day where technology allowed us to kill at an industrial scale. The battle for this city serves as a dark monument to the turn of the millennium. It taught the world a terrifying lesson, that if a military power is willing to abandon all restraint, if it is willing to turn a city into dust to save its own soldiers, then there is no defense. Grozny was eventually rebuilt. Glass skyscrapers now stand where the ruins once smoked. The scars have been paved over. But the soil beneath remains heavy with the weight of what happened. 2,000. 3,000. The numbers are just estimates. In the inferno of that day, bodies were not counted, they were disintegrated. This was the day the sky fell. This was the day humanity looked into the abyss of urban warfare, and the abyss blinked back with the flash of a thermobaric explosion. This was Grozny. the day of the bombardment. A day we must remember, not to glorify the victors, but to mourn the silence that followed. Grozny today has been rebuilt. Skyscrapers have risen on the old ground, covering the craters of yesteryear. But history never sleeps. It lies there, cold and brutal, reminding us that when the boundaries of humanity are erased, hell is not far away, it is right here on Earth. We tell this story not to judge right or wrong, but to engrave the price of peace. If you felt a chill at this naked truth, and want to continue dissecting the bloodiest pages of human history with me, hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications. Don't forget to leave a comment about the battle you want me to recreate in the next episode. I am your host, and this is the Bloodiest Days. See you in file number 2.